The most dangerous bartender in the Wild West did not stand behind a mahogany rail in a deadwood saloon. He did not carry a shotgun, and he did not serve whiskey in a shot glass. He stood behind the counter of the general store. He was a grocer, and the bottle he handed you didn't say bourbon. It said Hostiter's Stomach Bitters. It claimed to cure indigestion, malaria, nervousness, and liver complaint. What the label did not say was that the liquid inside was 44% alcohol, 88 proof. That is stronger than the whiskey served at the Gem Saloon down the street. The patent medicine industry of the late 19th century was the greatest unregulated narcotics distribution network in human history. It was a machine that generated $75 million a year in revenue, roughly $2.5 billion in today's currency, by selling addiction to people who had sworn off liquor. The settlers didn't trust doctors. Doctors were expensive, they were scarce, and their tools were terrifying. But they trusted the bottle with the kindly face of a Quaker or a grandmother on the label. They trusted the vegetable compound. And because of that trust, an estimated 50,000 Americans in the frontier era became functional narcotics addicts, enslaved not by a cartel, but by a catalog. Let's analyze the chemistry of the deception. The term patent medicine is a lie. These medicines were almost never patented. To patent a product, you have to reveal the ingredients to the patent office. That was the last thing these manufacturers wanted to do. If you revealed that your golden medical discovery was just water, burnt sugar, and grain alcohol, the game was over. Instead, they relied on trademarks. They trademarked the name, the bottle shape, and the label art. The formula remained a trade secret, and the secret was always the same: make the patient feel something instantly. The mechanism of the cure was blunt force pharmacology. There were three main active ingredients in the frontier medicine cabinet: alcohol, opium, and cocaine. Take Hostiter's Bitters. It was the king of the plains. In the Dakota Territory, you could buy it by the case. It was marketed as a positive protective against the fatal maladies of the southern swamps. It was actually a cocktail. The base was high-proof neutral spirits. To this, they added gentian root, orange peel, and cinnamon to make it taste medicinal. The genius of Hostiter's was that it allowed a devout Baptist or Methodist to get blind, drunk without sinning. A temperance crusader could drink a bottle of Hostiter's a day to settle his nerves. He wasn't drinking liquor. He was taking his medicine. The physiological effect was identical to pounding 6 shots of vodka, but the psychological effect was righteousness. In the Union Army during the Civil War, Hostiter's was practically a food group. After the war, the veterans took the habit west. The bitters became the standard currency of the frontier. In dry counties where alcohol was banned, Hostiter's sales spiked by 400%. The forensic data tracks perfectly. Wherever the saloon closed, the pharmacy boomed. But alcohol was just the base layer. The real killer was the soothing syrup. The frontier was a hard place to raise a child. A crying baby in a one-room sod house with the wind howling and the parents exhausted from 18 hours of labor was a source of desperate stress. Enter Mrs. Winslow's soothing syrup. The bottle showed a mother holding an infant. It looked gentle. It claimed to cure teething pain and dysentery. The active ingredients were alcohol and morphine sulfate. Specifically, each ounce contained roughly 65 milligrams of morphine. To put that in perspective, a modern hospital dose of morphine for severe trauma is often 5 to 10 milligrams. Mrs. Winslow was dosing infants with narcotics that would drop a horse. The result was immediate silence. The baby didn't stop crying because the pain was gone. The baby stopped crying because it was in a narcotic coma. They called them rag babies, limp, pale, and shallow breathing. The mortality rate associated with these syrups is impossible to calculate precisely because the deaths were recorded as convulsions or wasting away. But the forensic reality is that thousands of infants on the frontier were quietly overdosed by their own parents. The parents didn't know. They thought they were helping. The soothing was actually respiratory depression leading to death. Then there was the Red Cross electric fluid, or Parker's tonic. These weren't sedatives, they were stimulants. The active ingredient was cocaine. Before 1900, cocaine was legal, cheap, and considered a wonder drug. It was the energy drink of the 19th century. A settler clearing land, swinging an axe for 12 hours a day, would take a swig of a cocaine-based tonic. The fatigue would vanish. The hunger would vanish. He felt invincible. He could work harder. The economic loop this created was insidious. The tonic gave him the energy to work, but the crash left him useless. To get back to work, he needed more tonic. The cure for the fatigue was the cause of the fatigue. The manufacturers knew this. They weren't selling a cure. They were selling a subscription model rooted in biological dependency. The specific brand Peruna deserves a forensic audit. It was marketed by Dr. Samuel B. Hartman. It claimed to cure catarrh. What is catarrh? In 1890, it was a catch-all term for inflammation of the mucous membranes, congestion, runny nose, cough. But Hartman expanded the definition. He invented catarrh of the stomach, catarrh of the heart, and catarrh of the kidneys. If you were tired, it was catarrh. If you were sad, it was catarrh. Peruna was 28% alcohol. It cost roughly 8 cents to manufacture, about $2.50 today. It sold for $1, roughly $32 today. The margin was nearly 1,000%. Hartman became a multimillionaire. He built a mansion. He didn't just sell medicine, he bought politicians. The Peruna drunk became a slang term in the West. The Bureau of Indian Affairs eventually banned Peruna on reservations because it was being used strictly as an intoxicant. The marketing budget of these companies rivaled the GDP of small nations. They were the first pioneers of direct-to-consumer advertising. They bought the back page of every newspaper from St. Louis to San Francisco. Their ads didn't just sell the product, they sold fear. They would list vague symptoms. Do you have cold hands? Do you feel tired after a meal? Do you have a dull ache in the back? Every human being has these symptoms. The ad would then pivot. This is the first stage of Bright's disease. Take Warner's Safe Cure or prepare your will. They invented the testimonial. The ads were filled with letters from grateful users who had been snatched from the jaws of death. Many of these letters were fabrications. Others were from real people who were simply high on the alcohol and opium at the moment they wrote the letter. A forensic investigation by journalism muckrakers later found that many of the cured patients featured in the ads had actually died of the disease they were supposedly cured of, sometimes months before the ad ran. The companies didn't care. They kept running the testimonial. The medicine show was the retail arm of this fraud. A wagon would roll into a town like Abilene or Dodge City. It wasn't just a store, it was a circus. There would be a banjo player, a dancer, maybe a wild Indian, often a local white man in grease paint, performing a war dance. The show drew the crowd. The doctor, usually a man with zero medical training but a booming voice, would step up. He would perform the demonstration. He would take a local man who was limping. He would rub Kickapoo Indian sagwa oil on the leg. He would give the man a swig of the tonic, high alcohol cocaine. Within minutes, the man would feel the heat of the peppers in the oil and the rush of the drugs. He would throw down his cane and dance. The crowd would buy every bottle in the wagon. The show would pack up and leave before the crash hit. It was a hit-and-run economic attack on the town's wallet and liver. Let's look at the Pinkham phenomenon. Lydia E. Pinkham's vegetable compound was marketed specifically to women. The frontier woman had a brutal life. Isolation, constant labor, multiple childbirths without medical aid. She suffered from female complaints, a Victorian euphemism for menstrual pain, prolapsed uterus, or just exhaustion. Lydia Pinkham's face was on every bottle. She looked like a stern but loving grandmother. The marketing genius was the personal touch. The ads said, "Write to Mrs. Pinkham. She will read your letter and advise you." And women did. Thousands of women wrote intimate letters about their bodies and their pains to this woman in Massachusetts. The reality? Lydia Pinkham died in 1883. For decades after her death, the company kept inviting women to write to Lydia. The letters were opened by a staff of male clerks who typed up form letter responses. The advice was always the same. Buy more vegetable compound. The compound was roughly 18% alcohol. It was a mild cocktail that numbed the pain and elevated the mood. It was the housewife's secret martini. The addiction was hidden behind the veil of treatment. The financial scale of this industry created a massive vested interest in preventing regulation. The patent medicine companies were the largest source of revenue for the newspaper industry. They inserted red clauses in their advertising contracts. The clause stated, "This contract is void if any law is passed in your state restricting the sale of proprietary medicine." This was blackmail. If a newspaper editor wrote an article criticizing Peruna or calling for regulation, he lost his biggest advertiser instantly. The press was gagged by the drug money. The Fourth Estate of the West was bought and paid for by the alcohol and opium pushers. The friction point, the moment the scam began to unravel, came from the chemists. The North Dakota lab incident is a key forensic pivot. In 1905, the state of North Dakota passed a law requiring labeling. The manufacturers pulled their products from the state in protest. A chemist named E.F. Ladd started analyzing the bottles. He published the results. He found that Liquozone, a cure-all sold for 50 cents, $16, was 99% water and 1% sulfuric acid. He found that the opium cures sold to help addicts get off morphine actually contained more morphine than the drug they were addicted to. It was a maintenance dose disguised as a cure. The climax of the story is the Great American Fraud. This was the title of a series of articles written by Samuel Hopkins Adams in Collier's magazine in 1905. Adams was a forensic journalist. He didn't just complain. He brought the receipts. He published the chemical breakdowns. He published the death certificates of the children killed by the soothing syrups. He published the photos of the cured patients' gravestones. He commissioned a famous cartoon. It showed a skeleton in a tuxedo, death, holding a bottle of patent medicine. The visual was shocking. It broke the trance. The public suddenly realized that the Harmless tonic was a loaded gun. The outcry led to the Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906. This was the first time the federal government stepped into the medicine cabinet. It didn't ban the drugs. That would come later with the Harrison Act of 1914. But it demanded truth in labeling. You could still sell a bottle of alcohol and morphine, but you had to write alcohol and morphine on the label. You couldn't call it baby quieter. The effect was instantaneous. Sales of the most egregious poisons plummeted. When a mother saw the word morphine on the syrup bottle, she stopped buying it. When a temperance preacher saw 44% alcohol on his bitters, he couldn't justify the purchase. The light of information killed the bacteria of fraud. But the industry didn't die. It mutated. This is the legacy phase. The companies that survived were the ones that pivoted. Coca-Cola is the most famous example. It started as a patent medicine, Pemberton's French wine coca. It contained wine, alcohol, and coca leaf, cocaine. It was a nerve tonic. When prohibition sentiment rose, they removed the wine. When the backlash against cocaine rose, They removed the active cocaine, keeping the flavor of the leaf. They rebranded it from a medicine to a refreshing beverage. They moved from the pharmacy counter to the soda fountain. The bitters companies simply changed their labels to digestive aperitifs. The liver pads disappeared, but the psychology remained. The desire for a quick fix, a bottle that solves the complex problems of life, is permanent. Let's look at the sensory reality of a soothing syrup overdose. The forensic details are documented in coroner's reports. The child would drift off. The breathing would slow. The skin would turn blue. Cyanosis. The pupils would be pinpoint. The parents, ignorant of the pharmacology, would think the child was sleeping deeply. They would go to sleep themselves. In the morning, the child would be cold. The coroner, often the local doctor who sold the syrup, would list the cause of death as failure of the heart. It kept the peace. It kept the store open. The specific inflation-adjusted cost of addiction is staggering. A bottle of Peruna a day, a common habit for a hard drinker, cost $1. That is $32 a day, $960 a month. In an era where a cowboy made $30 a month, how did they afford it? They didn't. They went into debt. The store credit system of the general store trapped them. The grocer owned the addict. The addict worked to pay off the medicine that kept him from working. It was a sharecropping system of the soul. The gold Keeley cure was the reaction to the addiction. By the 1890s, there were so many addicts that a counter-industry sprang up. Dr. Leslie Keeley opened sanatoriums to cure alcohol and opium habits. He used double chloride of gold. He injected gold into patients. It was a placebo, mostly. But the fact that franchise Keeley Institutes popped up all over the West proves the scale of the problem. You don't build rehab centers in a population that isn't addicted. There is a myth that the Wild West was a place of robust health and Darwinian selection. The reality was that it was a population propped up by chemical crutches. The tough pioneer was often functioning in a haze of laudanum. The stoic wife was vibrating with cocaine. The silence of the prairie was amplified by the silence of the opiates. The legacy of the patent medicine era is written in the FDA. Every time you read a label that says, "Warning, may cause drowsiness," you're looking at a tombstone of a 19th century settler. We regulate because we remember, or the law remembers, what happens when you sell 80-proof whiskey as liver regulator. The snake oil salesman is a joke figure in cartoons. But in 1880, he wasn't a joke. He was a predator. He rolled into town, extracted the wealth, poisoned the children, and rolled out before the symptoms set in. He was the most successful serial killer of the frontier, and he did it all with a smile and a money-back guarantee that expired the moment he crossed the county line. The 40% alcohol content wasn't the bug. It was the feature. In a life defined by hardship, pain, and dust, the bottle offered the one thing the frontier couldn't: an escape. The settlers didn't buy the medicine to get well. They bought it to go away, and for 50,000 of them they went away and never came back. This is the ledger of the general store. On one side, flour and beans. On the other side, liquid death in a glass bottle. The scale balanced perfectly, weighted down by silver dollars.